All right, everybody, let's get started a little bit early. Is that all right? Okay. My name is John Seidel, Director of the Southwest Southeast Asia Center. And on behalf of the center, I'm delighted to do the second of our webinar seminars we have running in a series of events that will not only include talks, but quite a few additional secondary events as well. Planning a very exciting second term, a winter term filled with events that include some documentary films. So keep an eye out for our future events. But today, it's a pleasure to welcome you to today's talk, Inside Southeast Asia's Cybercrime Compounds, which is a book talk, a sort of belated book launch for this fantastic book, Scam Inside Southeast Asia's Cybercrime Compounds by Yvonne Franceschini, Ling, and Mark Bowe, who's here with us today. Before introducing Mark, let me just say a few things in terms of sort of housekeeping. First, today's event is being recorded, so don't leave out your PIN numbers and bank details and so forth. Considering the nature of the talk, be careful what you say in terms of being scammed. But more seriously, if you want to post about this event on social media, please do so and tag us. We are on LinkedIn and also Instagram. We're also on YouTube, where you can find this and future recorded events. So without further ado, it's a real pleasure to introduce Mark Bowe, who's a researcher who's been based in East and Southeast Asia for the past 2 decades. He's been working as a consultant, researching organized crime trends in Southeast Asia and conducting open source intelligence investigations into different sort of actors and organizations and operations involved in cyber-enabled fraud. And in 2024, he co-founded the nonprofit organization EOS Collective, which investigates and documents the spread of the online scam industry and provides support to some of its victims and survivors. He's the co-author of the book I mentioned, Scam Inside Southeast Asia's Cybercrime Compounds, published by Verso here in London in 2025. And he's also published articles on cyber scams and human trafficking in publications like Trends in Organized Crime and also Critical Asian Studies. So please join me in welcoming Mark, and let's hear what he's got to tell.
Thanks very much for the introduction. Just have to say first, I've been a bit sick recently, so sorry if I'm coughing and I've got a bit of brain fog, so I might have to rely on my notes a bit more than I would usually like to. But yeah, thank you again. Thank you for the invite. Thank you for joining. So yeah, I'm here to talk about the book we published earlier this year. I'm sure that you've heard about this phenomena, the scams that has emerged in the last 5-6 years. It really kind of started to capture media coverage, public discourse. So I'm sure this is not new to you. But for many years, when we thought about these scams that were coming from overseas by email, phone, very often they were associated with West Africa or maybe India. Now we're seeing more and more the linkages to Southeast Asia and also crime groups that have originated from mainland China, from Taiwan, and throughout the Southeast Asia region. So we're looking at a new phenomenon, a new kind of development in the global scam landscape. So the background to this book, just to kind of give some context, I lived in Southeast Asia, I lived in China for about the last 20 years before relocating back here. I work mostly in the field of business and human rights, but I moved around quite a bit, settled in Cambodia around 2015. I started to see pretty much around the time that I came back, there was this massive influx of investment, largely into property, into casinos, into offices in Cambodia, a lot focused in a city called Sinophone down on the coast. So that already kind of got me interested, because there was a lot of discussion, what's going to happen with all of this property? There's no demand, and there's no, like in the medium long-term future of the country, there was not a demand for this level of construction of this type of building. So there's a lot of discussion about, where's this money coming from? Why is it going in there? What's it going to be used for? And then as I was following this, I started to see in Chinese news sources and also various WeChat channels, people talking about the rise of crime, especially in Sinophone. more talk about crime around casinos. You start to see talk about online gambling, online casinos. Then as time went on, I started to see these stories trickle out about people being trafficked into these sites, people being held, confined in these sites, a lot of violence going on. And you could see that there was really something there under the surface. There was something very big, but we didn't really know what it was. It was going on within the kind of, largely in the Chinese community, the Chinese business community in Cambodia, not well understood to the outsiders. So got to COVID time, like a lot of people, I had a lot more time on my hand than I did before. And so I started to more methodically document these reports, trying to identify what are the sites, you know, if we've got a picture of some incident at a certain casino, where is that casino? Who owns that casino? You know, who are the shareholders? Who's connected to this? And then what companies are they connected to? And who are those executives connected to? So we started to map out a bigger picture to try and work out what's going on and also who's behind it. And so, yeah, with Ling, Ivan comes from a background working on labor issues, and he'd been looking at construction in Cambodia and especially in Sinophone. And Ling is a specialist in anti-human trafficking and survivor support. So we decided collectively we had a lot of information, but we didn't really know what to do with it, and we thought it's worth finding a way to pull this together and write something. So that's how the book came about. Wasn't really planned. We kind of fell into it, but that's how it all kind of started. So what we're talking about, scams. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you've probably heard about the pig butchering scams. It's a pretty unpleasant term. It's used by the industry. It describes, there's variations, but it's basically initiating contact with someone, building some kind of relationship, romantic or just friendship, and convincing people to invest in usually like a dubious crypto platform or in Forex or in gold or whatever. And then coaching them to invest more and more, invest bigger amounts, you're going to make more. And they can see on these fake apps, fake websites, the value of their investment going up. And then when they get suspicious and they want to take the money out, they pull the rug and they're gone, and the money is lost. But there's many other types, like really common now, law enforcement scams. People will call people in China, in Singapore, Japan, Malaysia, Thailand, India, and say you're under investigation. And they'll say you need to transfer the contents of your account to this escrow account while we investigate, and then it's gone. And some of those are increasingly sophisticated. So lots of stuff. Sextortion, there was a report a couple of months ago about the prevalence, or the growing prevalence of these scams, where usually young people are duped into, revealing themselves or engaging in some kind of compromising chat or video, and then they're blackmailed with the recordings of that. And that's happening a lot from Southeast Asia as well. So all different kinds of scams, not just pig butchering, but many can be traced back to these sites in Southeast Asia. So locations, this is from a UNODC report I stole. So you can see kind of in general, Cambodia hit mostly kind of border areas, the same Myanmar, mostly border. The exception is Siem Reap, which is coastal, and Phnom Penh. But we saw these places emerge largely to begin with in areas where there was casino infrastructure. To begin with, casinos started to host companies' operations that were operating online gambling and online scams. That grew. Those casinos blocked off whole areas of their properties so that they could host this. They started to build whole new facilities in the areas surrounding casinos. And then we started to see entire purpose-built compounds. They're built just for the purpose of housing online operations, whether it's online casinos or online scams. I'll come back to this later, explain what the arrows mean. But this is kind of the rough spread around mainland Southeast Asia. So Cambodia, eastern Myanmar and Myanmar, up in Wa State, the Kokang region, Musée and Shan, and in Laos around the Golden Triangle Special Economic Zone, which has long been a hub for all kinds of transnational crime, but has pivoted to become like a major center for the online criminal operations. So, a few pictures. It's in Sinophone, Kai Bo compound. That's one of the larger ones, very well established, very well known, very operational. K99, another one not too far from Kaiboa. A lot of very bad stories from this place. Nanhai in Sinophone again. So this is a hotel, but whole parts of the hotel are occupied by online. Then the block at the back is residential, lots of dormitories in there for the workers, usually 6 to 8 people in a room in bunk beds. And then Myawaddy on the east of Myanmar, this is along the river. This is Thailand, very, very close. Entire zones that are dedicated to hosting these online operations. Golden Triangle, special economic zone, like casinos, very fancy casinos, and still construction ongoing. There's no other reason I can see for these constructions there. Huge developments, and there's not demand for office space in the Golden Triangle of that part of Laos. So that's where we're up to in terms of where it's spread. Then when we look at who works there, to begin with, it was almost entirely Chinese and Taiwanese. So mainland China, Taiwan, and they were targeting people in China or in the mainland, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong. Over time, it has evolved, diversified. This is from the same UN report I showed before. They identified, I think it was 56 nationalities of people have been found inside the scam operations within the region. I've seen figures more recently that's 70 plus. So it's gone from being a very kind of Sinocentric type industry to a very, 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 very diverse one now. Still, I would say the majority of people working in these places are Chinese. There's a lot of Indonesians, a lot of Thais, especially in the border areas, lots of Vietnamese, all over the region, but especially in Cambodia. There's thousands of people from different African countries in Myanmar. But it's not just developing countries. There's just recently there was a South Korean 22-year-old student was found dead in Cambodia. He was murdered at one of the scam compounds. He was tortured and died while being tortured, and it's causing a bit of a diplomatic incident. There's Japanese people have been taken out just this year. So all kinds of people are being sucked in. One thing, what we saw early on when we're looking at the reporting about this, and people were talking about who's kind of getting recruited, who's being trafficked, who's being trafficked, who's being pulled in. There was this idea that it was kind of a new industry that involved people that were tech savvy, experts in IT, and all the systems required to do kind of the online scamming. But I think it's really not the case. If you look, really all they ask for is that people can type. When you see the ads, it's type so many words per minute, and it's not even a lot of words per minute. They come and they're trained up. They have scripts to use. They have systems to onboard people, if you will. So all kinds of people are being dragged in. Most of the people we've spoken to are from, for the most part, mainland China. I'd say 80%. And for them, they are mostly male. Most of them only have high school education. Some didn't finish high school. Not very well off, a low income background, and with unstable or no work before they got there. It differs from country to country. I know that for Indians, we're seeing a lot of Indians that have graduated with IT degrees. They've come out in India into a work market where it's saturated. There are no opportunities, so they're looking for work overseas, and then they're ending up in these places. So it differs from place to place. So what we're talking about in terms of how the scams work, this is a simplified chart of what we've identified. This is based on a real case from someone that was inside a compound in Myanmar. So they said where they were working. And I should say first, if we're talking about these large compounds that are built purposely to house online gambling, online scam operations, they will be owned by a person or a group of people. Then within that, they will rent out to sometimes dozens of companies. We'll call companies, they might not be registered as companies, but different operations. So they might manage the property, but they host all types of scam operations. And in this one, they said there was 244 people working at the scam level. They report to team leaders, they report to co-managers, and then you have heads of department. At the bottom, when we have the scammers, there's kind of a hierarchy in terms of experience and skill. So newbies come in, they do basic tasks. Like when you get those scam WhatsApp messages, they're blasted out by SIM boxes. They can blast like 10,000 messages. Gone. Most of them will be ignored. Some people reply and say, oh, I think you've got the wrong number. And then the first line workers will respond to that, try and strike up a conversation. When it gets to a certain level, they'll pass it up to someone who is more skilled, more experienced. If they've got someone on the hook for a lot of money, it will go to a very experienced person who can land the large value scam. So throughout the whole thing, there's a hierarchy. It's very structured. Then elsewhere, like outside of the actual scam operation, but within the broader compound environment, you'll have internal security enforcers, people that deal with like problem workers. They have human resources and finance departments, and they actually call them that. They work, like a company. Then a lot of these places are sealed. People can't come and go, so there'll be KTV, hairdressers, stores, all the things people need. It's basically a captive economy. And so there's the businesses that cater to that. External, the groups that are really important to the functioning, people that are developing the apps and the software and maintaining them, they're selling that to these operations. They're not making their own things. There's a whole economy set up. There's data brokers that are selling the information for people to contact. There's money laundering platforms, money mules. Often it can be someone who's just a regular person selling their bank account for $20, and then it gets used to launder sometimes millions of dollars in cash. And then here, kind of sometimes overlooked, the local element is that it generates a lot of economic activity in the vicinity. If you go to some of these sites when they're under construction, there's hundreds of local workers, laborers that are building it, and they're recruited as cleaners, maintenance, security. So they change the entire economic environment in the places where they grow. So we believe this is basically a new frontier in modern slavery. I don't think it's an exaggeration. This is a picture from an escape in 2022 from a compound in Kandal in Cambodia. 60-something Vietnamese escaped. The river runs in front of it, and Vietnam is across the river. They jumped into the river to swim back to Vietnam. One of the people that escaped was a child, 16 years old. He drowned trying to swim to the other side. And someone leaked videos of guys like this chasing them to the river. They caught some and dragged them back. That's kind of environment we're talking about. But the workforce is, excuse me. I did well to last that long. The workforce is a mixture of willing and unwilling people, voluntary and forced labor, but it's not a simple binary. There's trafficking in person. It's a huge problem. There's forced criminality. We've heard of kidnaps. We've heard of people that have run up debts in the casino. They've lost their money. They've gone to loan sharks. There's loan sharks all over the casinos. They lend money. They borrow money. They can't pay back, and then they get sold by the loan sharks to the scam compounds. So kidnapping, people being sold in there. One of the biggest problems is deceptive recruitment. A lot of posts going out on Facebook, on Telegram, on legitimate job recruitment websites for customer service jobs in Asia. And a lot of those people are ending up in places like this. So that's a massive issue. And then the compounds are closed, the movement is restricted, passports are taken away. If you want to leave, usually you have to pay what's called compensation by the industry, basically a ransom. But it's complicated, sorry, in several respects. One, some people do enter willingly, but the people that enter willingly often cannot leave. Some people, maybe they go in there because they think they can get rich. Some people go in out of desperation. A lot of the people we've spoken to had very limited prospects where they were. That was made worse by COVID. Very few job opportunities. They get these job offers. They might know it's illegal. They might think it's kind of in a gray area. Some people we've spoken to, they thought they were getting jobs in online gambling, customer support. Then they get there, they're told, no, this is a scam operation and you can't leave. So that blurs the moral boundaries somewhat. And then we've even seen cases where some people have been trafficked. They've been forced into the work. and they've excelled, they've climbed the ranks, and then they've brought people in themselves. So it's a very corrupting industry. It's complex, but for sure that the scale of human trafficking, forced criminality going on within that industry is massive, and a massive unaddressed issue. Like I said, like once you're in there, most people, whether you go in there willingly or not, usually forced to sign a contract that binds you maybe for a year to the company. If you break that contract, you've got to pay to leave. In a lot of places, we've seen reports where people finish their contract and they still won't let them leave. So very, very problematic. A lot of bonded labor, and brutality is just ubiquitous across the entire industry. There's low-level violence. There's always, it's always happening. If you don't hit performance standards, if you don't follow instructions, there's slaps, kicks, making people run up and down stairs, stand out in the sun, and so on. Repeated violations of the rules in the office can result in more serious physical punishments. If you try to escape, the consequences can be incredibly brutal. That's where some people are dying. The compound management, the management of the scam operations, they frequently record the torture and they show it to other workers as a message, but they'll also send it to family members to try and get ransom from them. So a lot of family members are sending videos to groups like I work with of their children being tortured with the captors demanding ransom. Very, very common. And there are rescues, there are escapes. Escapes are very dangerous, it happens. There are rescues, but it's very, very difficult. One way is if you can get word out to your embassy, then the embassy might apply pressure, but we know that many embassies find it very, very difficult to get the local police to take action. There are cases where an incident happens that gets out into the public, maybe a video is shared, and the police will go and extract someone. But very often they're going into a place that might house 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people, all working online, and they'll have the name of a person. They'll go in and take that person out, and the rest remains untouched. It's just a pressure valve. It's just to get rid of that problem, and things continue. And unfortunately, deaths are incredibly common. For a while, I was trying to keep track of the deaths, and it just became too much. It was impossible. Constant falling from buildings, drug overdoses, violent deaths, murders. Incredibly disturbing situation. So I think that's the worst of it over. That's the grim stuff. If you're thinking about, where did it come from? Why everyone knows about this now. It's in the media every day. It was in the media a lot yesterday. How can it persist? In plain sight. What we've seen, we can trace the origins back to Taiwan and mainland China. We saw in the 90s and the 2000s a lot of phone scams from Taiwan, a lot targeted people in Taiwan, a lot targeted people in mainland China. When the police tightened up on that, groups moved to mainland, especially Fujian, but many other parts of the country. And then when the mainland police tightened up, they sought external bases and they moved into Southeast Asia. So it's push and pull factors. So the push was, it's too risky to be working here. The pull in Southeast Asia, there's land available. The infrastructure was good enough to host it. Very porous borders. You can move people back and forwards fairly easily, without going through formal immigration. And this is key, very weak law enforcement or non-existent law enforcement. Many of these places are linked to very powerful local elite actors. And I don't know if this is used in English, but very common in Chinese reports, they talk about protective umbrellas. So these groups have a protective umbrella. Either the police don't go there, or if the police are going to go there, they're told in advance and they're ready for any inspections. When things are tense, the industry can be very mobile and adaptive. I'll come back to that. But this is really key, that this hasn't been imposed on these countries. It's causing a lot of harm, but the industry has gravitated to where it's gone because it can, and it's staying there because it can. Just a few examples of kind of the responses. I won't read them. You can have a look yourself, but we saw, to begin with, when reports started to come out of people being rescued from sites or police intervening because they had a letter from an embassy or a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they'd go in and they'd take some people out. And then when the press talked to local officials and say what was going on, these are the kind of responses you would get. Surreal responses in some cases. Very often they would say, oh, it's a labor dispute. Like one in Bavet, I think in 2021, 22, I think 2025 Vietnamese, they trashed the office. From the pictures, you could see it was an online office. You could see their dormitories. They trashed it, and then they went on the balcony and they screamed for help. And then people in neighboring buildings videoed it. It went online. The police came and they said, there's a labor dispute. Like, that's not what a labor dispute looks like. You don't scream for help from a balcony in a labor dispute. But that kind of response is very common. And then more recently, when they've taken people out, they'll say they've been deported for illegal work and residence. They don't talk about the scams. So the turning a blind eye is constant. It's part of it's not it's the system. This is how it works. And just this one, just draw attention to this one. Very frustrating to me. You see very often. This is from Cambodia's anti-trafficking committee chair, but I've seen it in other countries as well. When confronted by the media or whoever about why you're not dealing with this, they'll say, oh, this is a new type of crime. We don't really know how to deal with it. It's high tech. They're using advanced technology. They're in the shadows. But it doesn't cut it. You know, it's very hard to investigate these things. It's hard to investigate the money flows. It's very hard to get money back for victims. But for the actual sites where these operations are based, it's very, very obvious where they are. I can show you. This is Phuket, a town on the Cambodia-Thai border. These are just the places that I've managed to identify. It's like 45 places. Some of them huge. One over right on the border, owned by a senator. So very, very prominent, not in the shadows. This is Bavet in Phai Rien. This is pretty much all of Bavet city, and half of it is now online. You can see like here, this area is all being constructed now, and it's so new that it doesn't show up on Google Maps yet. Like this whole area is covered with a massive new compound, bigger than any of the other ones. If you go to Bavet, you just see razor wire everywhere, bars on the windows, locked gates, signs for online gambling sites, and so on. But it's very obvious what's going on. I think Sinophone most obvious. These are all the sites that I've managed to identify. You can see some huge, that's Kai War, the one I showed earlier. Huge sites. This one, this one here, right in the center of the city. Looks like that. It's so obvious. I took this off of Google Images. You don't even need to go there. You know, I would say that they're hiding in plain sight, but they're not even hiding. It's right there. This is typical look for one of these compounds. It's Jinbei 4. It's linked to the group that you might have seen was sanctioned yesterday by the UK government, US government. The head of that business group is now indicted in the US for alleged links to cyber scam operations. This is still active. What I mentioned before about these kind of targeted interventions by law enforcement, about 2 years ago, there was a protest by Indian workers there. It's about 50 Indians inside making a scene. They were chanting that they wanted their passports back. People filmed it. It went online. And because of that, the police had to go in. They went in, they took out those Indians, and the Indian embassy facilitated their repatriation. And it just continued to operate. There was no discussion about what actually happens there. There was the usual thing, like these people have been deported for visa immigrations or working illegally, and it just continues. That's the root cause. That's the root of the problem that we're dealing with, because global law enforcement can throw money at this, but as long as there's a secure base for places to operate from, it's just a constant cat and mouse game. Last one, hammer my point home a bit more, but this is a site in Verso, very well-known scam compound on the Thai border again. That shows the expansion between December 22, March 2025. Highly problematic, but this even more so, because this is February 2024. there was nothing there. And in just 1 year, you've got that. And it's bigger than that now. All of this is developed now. And there is no response on what's happening there. It's in a border area close to the Vietnam border. There is no demand for like a business park this size there. And we've had reports from there of people that are confined, and it's very hard to get out of that place. And that's just one. I know I could give you like 6 or 7 more examples like this of places that have just grown up in the last year. Last one. So I'm not focusing too much on Cambodia. Myanmar, Eastern Myanmar. This is 5 years. This is February 2022, and in just 5 years, that's probably the biggest compound we know of in Southeast Asia. All of this is online gambling or online scams, and these are huge. These are huge buildings. Each one of those probably like 10 to 15 stories. You think there might be a few hundred buildings there. Very active. If you're on the other side and you look over, you can see lights on in all the windows. So this will be raking in billions and billions of dollars in scam proceeds. And to come back to the point I was making, how can this persist? The groups that come in, they work with the right people. This is from a recent sanction by the US that targeted several individuals, including a Chinese businessman, but his business partners up here. This guy, Sochit Tu, is the head of the Karen Border Guard Force, which is a border guard force which is underneath the junta military. And then other people, there are other officials in the border guard force. And then the compound is within territory that is controlled by that border guard force. The border guard force was sanctioned itself. There's been sanctions against a Cambodian senator. There's been actions against this company, which is a basically money laundering platform that has shareholders in the ruling family in Cambodia. So this is why it can persist. There's crackdowns. I'm not saying that nothing is happening. So Northern Myanmar, those huge crackdowns, it led to tens of thousands of people being sent back to China. But it came about through, I think, probably very strong pressure from China, because there was massive amount of scam activity on the border with China. A lot of people were getting sucked in, people were dying. A lot of capital flying out of Cambodia into these operations. That led to pretty spectacular fall for 4 families that basically controlled that area. They controlled the Kokam Border Guard Force. They controlled administration, military, police. They also controlled all the major conglomerates, and they were in hospitality, hotels, casinos, and they expanded into scam activity. And so they fell. Now 11 of them were sentenced to death 2 weeks ago in China. They were handed over by the Myanmar government. So there are crackdowns happening. Myanmar cracked down earlier this year under pressure from Thailand and China, again, external pressure. Cambodia, there's kind of a crackdown going on now. It was very active for about a week in July, it kind of ebbs and flows. But mostly, again, just targeting the smaller places, the more exposed ones, the ones that are not protected. And we go through this cycle we've seen over time. To begin with, when this started to be reported, there was just denial, like this doesn't exist. This is fake news, fake media, all the usual kind of things. And then you go from denial to, okay, we're cracking down on this. And then crack down. Then after that, okay, we've solved this problem. And then repeat the cycle again and again. So you go through these waves of crackdown. They're a pressure valve to look active and to, have something to point to, like, we take this seriously. We've deported 3,000 people in July and August. But it's a drop in the ocean. Thousands and thousands of people are there, and just a few are getting taken out. So I think for me, this is the key. It's a young industry. It's only popped up in the last 10 years, but we can see already it's evolving, and it's been evolving pretty much since it established itself. So I lived in Cambodia back 2007 to 2010, and you'd see every now and then these reports of police raiding like a guest house here or a villa there. And they would always say like it was a VoIP scam, a voice over internet protocol scam, where it was basically doing fraudulent calls to people in China from Cambodia, and they would arrest 10, 20 people, they would deport them. That's what we used to see, and didn't really think anything of it. We thought it was just kind of opportunistic criminal activity. But then over time, they became more frequent, and then the busts got bigger. And like I said, it moved into a more kind of industrialized environment within the casinos, within the compounds. And that's only continued. More and more of these big purpose-built compounds. At the same time, you can see this mobility of the industry. So this map I showed earlier, while they're building these, very concrete compounds, they host various operators. And when in 2019, it looked like Cambodian government might be tightening up on things. They introduced a ban on online gambling, and a lot of places moved out to other parts of the country that were less visible than Sinophone. They also went up to Myanmar, they went up to Laos. There's a crackdown again in 2022, mostly around Sinophone. Again, groups have come back, then they moved out. People were getting caught crossing the border here into Laos with a load of equipment, probably en route to the Golden Triangle Special Economic Zone, probably en route to Myanmar. Then when there's a crackdown in northern Myanmar in 2023 into 2024, they scattered into more remote areas of Shan State. They moved to Tachilet. From Tachilet in Myanmar, they moved to Bokeo in Laos. They moved to Myanmar. It's this kind of constant cycle. And we see now, I monitor a lot of Telegram channels that are used by people in the industry. And you see all the time posting about different operations, complaining about this and that. And many times you see they moved from Myanmar last year. They moved from Myanmar in 2023. So you can see when there's those pressure valve releases, when there's some kind of action, then things shift, and it's always shifting. So mobility is key. Diversification, already said. They started very much Chinese focused, then branching out to Chinese speakers in other countries, then bringing in more Thai, more Vietnamese, opening up new markets. So I think it's an organic development of the industry. I think like there's all of the whole world is potentially a market to them. So they brought in more people, diversified. When it got harder to bring workers in from China during the COVID pandemic because of the strict travel restrictions, they brought in more people from Vietnam. So it's like it's a business, very dynamic, increasingly diversified. They rebrand when they need to. A lot of places were operating out of kind of faceless buildings, especially in Cambodia. Then there was the crackdown in 2022. And you saw these places that before were just like fenced off buildings. Suddenly they got a sign that had a name of a casino on, but they're not open to the public. And they got a casino license. So now there's a company registered, they've got a business license, they've got a casino license. Very, very easy to get work permits and visas for people through agents. You've got all that paperwork, and it's rebranded as a legitimate business. Sophistication. The services being provided to these groups, increasingly sophisticated. The tools, the whole kits are being sold online for scamming. You can get these on Telegram. I can show you where you can get them. They're not hiding. There's all kinds of tools. There's AI. AI it's being used. I don't think it's being super widely used at the moment. It still has limitations, but face swap technology can be used in certain contexts. Definitely AI improvements to translation software really helps. So more and more tools available. And the last thing is expansion. So we're talking about Southeast Asia now, but I think again, as this kind of continuation, an organic growth of the industry, they're moving into new places, and they're also hedging. There's a lot of risk here. You could be protected, but your protection is not unlimited. Like we saw yesterday, like one of the biggest alleged people in the sector in Cambodia is now indicted in the US. That's a big shock to a lot of people. So that might destabilize things. That might have people very worried. So people are hedging. We've seen in Asia Pacific, in Palau, there were big moves to set up similar type operations in Timor-Leste. Sri Lanka is trying to deal with this now. There's a lot going on in Sri Lanka. And we're starting to see one thing I think is particularly interesting in Africa. Like I said, there's plenty of reports about scam activity in Africa. But now we're starting to see raids in different countries, several different countries. And when they brought the people out, there's Chinese managers with Malaysian workers, Filipino workers. So that setup clearly suggests that it's groups that were active in Southeast Asia that have expanded. Maybe they've moved, maybe they've expanded their activities. But you can see this kind of spread, and that's only going to continue. So, last slide. What can be done? Yeah, complain a lot, but that's the trick. I think, again, fundamentally, the real challenge is political will at the site of these operations. If they don't have sites that they can operate from that are protected, it's very hard to operate on this industrial scale. So action from host country is key. I mean, I don't mean to be give a blanket criticism of officials and law enforcement in these countries. I'm sure there are people in government, in law enforcement, in all of these countries that see this for what it is, and it is an existential threat. You know, politically, economically, they're destroying the country's reputation. They're very harmful to, you know, bilateral and multilateral diplomatic relations, and the reputational harm is massive. And now, if you talk to people in China about Cambodia, everyone will just say like, "Oh, it's dangerous." It's very much associated with that. And before the COVID pandemic, the percentage of Cambodia's tourism that was coming from China was huge. It wasn't just like more than 50%. It was upwards of like 80%, I think. They were building new airports specifically to accommodate this growth in tourism. And now people in China do not want to go to Cambodia because they think it's a dangerous place full of gangsters. You know, that's the legacy of this. So, you know, hopefully those people that see this, their voices will grow, you know, as more pressure comes to bear. Yeah, we'll see. Beyond that, outside, public awareness raising is really important. People are still getting scammed. Sometimes you look at these scams and you think, how could anyone fall for that? But they're very good. You know, I've seen reports of like finance compliance managers at banks getting duped with the classic pig butchering thing. You know, people clicking on links that they shouldn't be. Then they're putting malware on their devices and then emptying their bank accounts. Public awareness raising really important. Tech firms, there are these bespoke tools that are being developed for scam operators, but they also depend on meta platforms, you know, WhatsApp, Facebook, Telegram. They use them for recruitment. They use them as marketplaces. There are massive money laundering platforms that are just run through Telegram. You know, there's definitely been action. Like WhatsApp has taken down millions of dodgy accounts. They take down recruitment posts, but you can find them every day. I could open my computer and I could find one for you right now. They're so ubiquitous. They're all over the place. Yes, I think scrutiny of global assets. I think after the news yesterday, I don't know if you saw that there was sanctions against one major conglomerate based in Cambodia. The US has sanctioned more than 140 entities connected to that. You know, all of these entities, they're around the world. They're in Taiwan, they're in Singapore, Cambodia, Thailand. They have companies in the UK, companies in the US. They have companies, shell companies, assets flowing all around the world. There needs to be more effort to scrutinize this, and there needs to be more effort to seize those assets and trace the origin of those assets, which links obviously to this one. It's clear from yesterday and other cases that there's investigations, people have been charged, people have been convicted even, but this needs more resources. I think law enforcement globally doesn't have the resources to deal with this, and then policymakers need to direct the resources needed. And there needs to be cooperation. This cooperation, I'm sure the UK, US cooperate, UK, Australia cooperate. They're traditional partners when it comes to this. It's more complicated for, you know, non-traditional partners. But this is transnational. It involves people in multiple countries, multiple jurisdictions. I think one of the common blockages is the inability or the challenges that different law enforcement agencies have in cooperating with people, with their counterparts. So, yeah. Last thing, self-interested, working alongside a lot of civil society groups, but there needs to be more support. Many of the groups that were working on investigating this, supporting survivors, even helping rescues, many of them got funding either directly or indirectly from USAID. And since the US has pulled the plug on so much of its overseas development assistance, lots of anti-trafficking groups have just lost their funding. They've, cut staff, closed operations, people are working for free, people are working part-time at a time when the demand is, higher than ever. So yeah, I mean, it would be nice if that tap would be opened again, but there's a lot of other countries that I think need to step up and support civil society, including for aftercare for people that get out of these places, because people are physically and mentally traumatized. So yeah, that's my bit. I'm gonna wrap up, but yeah, if you want to know more, look for my book. I would say I've not read a book before, not sure if I will again, but it was not easy, very difficult, because when we started, we thought, okay, we know a lot. It would be useful to put this together. But it was, as we were writing, we were developing our understanding of what was going on. And, the classic thing, the more you find, the more you realize you don't know, right? So everything you find opens up more and more avenues to look. And it was, and it still is, this constantly moving target. And you're trying to write something that every time we finished a draft, a week later, the draft was out of date. I think in the short time between finishing it and publishing it, plenty of things got dated. It's very difficult. But yeah, I hope it contributes to the literature. I hope it's useful, more broadly to public, law enforcement, policymakers, and so on. And yeah, if you're interested, check it out. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Mark, for a great talk. I'll leave it to you to field questions from the audience here, but just to say, for those of you who are joining us online, if you have a question for Mark, please post it in the chat and in the Q&A, and give your name, we'll have an example of that, give your name, your affiliation, your location, your question, and we'll try to include you in the Q&A here. So any questions for Mark?
Hi, great work. I'm from Vietnam, so I have, especially in the past, I would say after COVID, but even before that, there were a few reports here and there of these compounds that exist, but it kind of go under radar quite a while. Like it's not like it's there, but a lot of journalists talk about it, but not in the other circles. So thank you so much for bringing it, I guess, in a book form, that's a lot more easily cited. I do have a very broad question about your methodology in general. You talk about it here and there, but yeah, I do wondering what are different methods you used for this book? Which one do you feel like is more needed? I guess like what do you feel like you want to do but you couldn't because of the nature of the topic? How do you deal with like ethics? And your own, safety and security.
Yep. So in terms of methodology, my background is in corporate investigations and mapping. So I was very much focused on the more open source intelligence aspects of this. So mapping the sites, investigating corporate records, finance records, looking at individuals connected, like what's their public footprint, what do we know about them, and piecing together that, looking through court documents, media reports really useful. I think in a situation like this is a very new thing. There's not much out there, and the people that were doing the most important work, especially early on, were local journalists because they were on the ground. It takes time for academic research to come out. International media, it takes time for them to get there and report. They don't have the same sources. They don't have the language skills. So working with published media and having journalists as sources was really important. Yeah, court documents. I think those are the main things on my side. But we work with survivors of the compound as well. My colleague Ling, she interviewed now more than 100 people that have been able to get out of the compounds. That was crucial because there's only so much you can see from outside. Their experiences were really valuable in helping us piece together what's actually going on inside. In terms of ethics, it's very tricky. Many of those people are deeply traumatized. There's the risk of re-traumatizing them and, leaving them worse off than when you met them. We don't want to be those kind of researchers that, extract from people to write their book and then leave, a mess in our wake. So it's very tricky. But Ling that's her specialty. Like she's trained in, survivor focused interview techniques and things like that. So yeah, that was a key part of the research. But it was piecing together everything that we could find in a space where a lot of information is hidden. So it was a bit of a puzzle. Yep.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the talk and for the excellent book. Just a quick question, because you talk about this taking hold, obviously, in Myanmar, Philippines, Laos, Cambodia, and you talk a little about geographical factors and other things like this. But I just wondered if you, and then in the book and also in the UN work you've done, you speak about how it's internationalizing and taking place, taking hold in parts of the Caucasus and West Africa or whatnot. I just wondered if there's any kind of commonalities in the kind of politics of the regimes and places this is taking place, or why it's happening in these places and not others. Like, why did it happen in Cambodia and Myanmar, for example, but we don't see it so much, a little bit, but not so much in Indonesia or Malaysia or whatever. So just a little bit about that.
That's a good question. You should okay from it. No, it is interesting.
I was trying to steal your idea too. Do that.
If you look, I compare, say, Philippines to Myanmar, very different context. I've not talked much about Philippines because there's only so much can squash in here. But in Myanmar, not all, but most of the operations we know of there are in areas that are controlled by ethnic armed organizations. And a lot of those areas, have historically been involved in different types of criminal activity, drugs, human trafficking, whatever. In the Philippines, it was very much formalized. So you had this thing called the Philippine Offshore Gambling Operator License. So they would get this license, which was supposed to be for running online casinos for foreign gamblers, but they were just used as cover for scam operations. But this was mainstream, legit. You could find all the information. You can find the corporate records, the shareholders. You can find the companies that are working inside there. People are walking in and out with a lanyard, very professionalized, but doing effectively the same thing. I think less brutality going on inside those places, but they're in Manila, Makati, like in major cities. So they're two very different contexts. And I think it just speaks to the adaptability of the industry. Like they find the entry point and then they structure themselves and their operations around that local environment. Research still do research. Yeah, but there's two.
Yeah, thanks. I'm from Thailand, so this is quite a personal issue, and I've helped a couple of journalists with some stories on this as well back home. But I was just wondering, from your experience, what your personal take was on the pressure exerted by the mainland Chinese authorities, because from what we see, it seems quite selective. Yes, they go and they do raids, they do arrest people, and sometimes they do sentence them to death. But in the case of the guy who does the Yatai group, the one that you were showing earlier, there are some that have been left to basically operate on their own. Sure, is in a Thai prison, but hasn't been extradited to China. But I wonder, in a region where people think, oh yeah, if the Chinese put enough pressure on something, then it'll happen. Why are we not seeing that? And I was wondering, what you've experienced of that.
Yeah, I think the role of China it's complicated, and there's a lot of conflicting analysis on it. I think just to your point at the end, I think this idea that if China says do this, countries will do it, I think it's kind of the mythology that's developed over recent years. So this idea of kind of unrestrained Chinese influence in the region, it's not the case. For sure, like plenty of countries try to exert influence on the region, not just China. But there's limitations to it, and there's calculations on the side of China. For example, before the Philippines banned POGOs, this offshore gaming licensing system, China was very, very vocal, very, very critical of that in a way that they were not critical of Cambodia, for example, because the bilateral relationship between those two countries was very different. And Cambodia is a very important ally, and they were, I'm sure they were applying pressure, but much more quietly in different ways. I think there's plenty of cases we know of. Like one example is there's a Chinese man who is on the run from a 10-year sentence, I think, and he's also subject to an Interpol, I think Hong Kong Interpol arrest warrant. He's in Cambodia, and it's been reported that the Chinese government really tried to get him back, and he wasn't handed over. So, pressure doesn't necessarily mean compliance. With Shujia in Thailand, I think China's really tried to get him back, but he's managed to drag his feet, and he's still fighting extradition. So yeah, I mean, I think there is an element of selectivity, because it's very hard to say, like, oh, Cambodia, I know of maybe 250 to 300 scam sites. If you say stop all of that tomorrow, it's just an impossibility, right? Maybe there's 200,000 people, foreigners working there. How are you going to police that? How do you shut them all down? If you arrest all those people, where do they go? How do you deport all those people? Like, it's messy and it's very complicated. Yeah, I think the role of China is key. And I think it's been overlooked because China was much more quiet early on about what it was doing. I think it became more public in response to public concern that it wasn't putting its weight behind this. But yeah, I think it's the bigger subject, but yeah. I'll go this way in the back. Yeah, near the window.
Thank you. I have a kind of related question. So I know you described this being kind of a new frontier of modern slavery and of human trafficking. And for context, I'm from Indonesia. And I know in terms of like domestic care workers from Indonesia who previously worked in the Middle East, that there's been some kind of move to migrate back to Indonesia, but that they're being replaced by a lot of women from Africa, specifically from Ethiopia. I was wondering with, how you mentioned kind of increased pressure with bilateral and multilateral relations, but also diversification, if you can predict or think that there will be any changes in the kind of labor patterns within cybercrime?
Good question. I think at the moment we're still at a stage where we don't have enough information to map the trends so far. We're learning everything like a year or two after the fact. Like just now, the data's come out that there's something like, I think it's around 90,000 Indonesians in Cambodia. And according to the embassy, most of them are working in online operations. And we didn't know that like a year ago. And they didn't just come from nowhere. So that will have been building up over time. But you don't get these snippets of information until all of a sudden, like your foreign minister says, like, there's 90,000 Indonesians there. And we don't know where most of them are. And then, so you're working with all these like varied data points from different sources with different levels of reliability. So it's really tricky to map the trends. But yeah, I think one thing I can imagine we're going to see more African people from African countries popping up. There's a lot more than we thought. There was a crackdown in Myanmar in Myanmar in February, March this year. And one compound, there was several hundred Ethiopians released. And no one had any idea there was that many Ethiopians in the region in this industry. And so now we know, like, yeah, it's a lot of Ethiopians in Myanmar district. So yeah, I can't give you a good answer. Still trying to work it out. I said to go that way.
So I'm a researcher with the Uni of Nottingham's Rights Lab and have also recently relocated after many years in Cambodia. So you spoke about the enabling environment for these operations, and I'm wondering what impact do you think that the shrunken space for independent human rights organizations and investigative journalists has had on this enabling environment and made this kind of work in exposing the centres more difficult, in addition to the USAID withdrawal, funding withdrawal that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's a big problem. I think, like I said, in Cambodia, the place where I was based and where I was most familiar with local journalists' work, local journalists and foreign journalists like based in the country, that was key. And that a lot was being reported earlier in Chinese sources, but it wasn't getting out to a popular audience and not to a Cambodian audience. So the work of local journalists was really important. Then international journalists started coming in, and the situation, blew up like it did. But I think without that early on, we might be, several years behind in understanding what's going on. That was really key. And you can see that because I also look at Laos. It's way harder to know what's going on there because there's no independent media, right? So I'm piecing together, all of this is piecing together little, like a scattered puzzle, and most of the pieces are missing. You're trying to work out what goes where. But when you're looking at Laos, there's even less pieces to put together because there's no NGOs on the ground that can speak out on this kind of thing. There's no media able to report. The media that does report, it's from outside the country, based on limited sources. So yeah, restriction on media. I mean, any field of human rights, it's an issue. And organized crime, the same. If there's not access and freedom of the press, it really makes things a lot harder. Yeah.
I'm a PhD student here at LSE, and I had a really basic question, which is, what is it about like cybersecurity, cybercrime, scam compounds that make it different from other industries of human trafficking, like sex industry, construction workers, like factory working? Is there anything specific or unique about cyber crime?
I think there's a lot of similarities. That's one reason why we pushed back quite a bit on this idea that the people being trafficked into the industry was somewhat special. Like maybe they had, they're IT professionals or whatever, because we were concerned that could set people apart as maybe more complicit because they've got a technical skill that they've been brought in to provide, which we don't think is the case. But I think the background, especially with the Chinese survivors of the compounds we've spoken to, very similar to victims of other types of trafficking. I think maybe something that sets it apart is the scale of the industry. And we're talking about not especially large countries and in one region, basically like archipelago of hundreds and hundreds of compounds, right? In very close proximity, connected by networks of trafficking. Network connected by traffickers that basically bounce between all of these different compounds. So just recently I managed to identify someone that was active in trafficking in one of those countries. And I could see that they'd gone to 15 different sites that I know as scam compounds. And I think you won't get that in other industries, that kind of concentration of an industry that depends on trafficked and coerced labor.
We have some questions online that we can try to address in the last, we have 10 minutes more. So first one from Lee Jones. Why don't I read it out to the audience? Yes. Lee Jones from Queen Mary, University of London. Hi, Mark, good to see you. Sorry I can't be there in person. 2 questions. Can you just talk a bit about how you did your research, how you got access to scam center workers, for example, whether the charities that help rescue them or otherwise? How do you trace links between the centers and elite backers? And then secondly, among the causes of scam centers, would you include failures of capitalist development? Some of these centers are purpose-built, but others use infrastructure from failed special economic zones or SEZs. Is the turn to scamming part of a wider crisis in capitalist upgrading, failed bids for investment, industrialization, a shortage of jobs for educated young people, and so forth?
Okay. First question.
Yeah, do you want to answer all of them or you want to go with that first?
Oh, there's some more?
Yeah, there's 2 more. Yes, yeah. So question from Phil Wilcox from Bielefeld University in Germany. 2 questions again, 2 questions. What connections, if any, did you find between these compounds? I'm interested to what extent they work in isolation from each other. Do you think that it's likely that numbers of people working in these scam compounds will go down as use of AI increases? If so, is that actually something positive for people trapped there in these really grim situations? Thanks. So more than 2 questions, really. And then finally, a question from Vanessa Capdevier due diligence and investigations professional. Are you using collaborative platforms for crowdsourcing the information, a sort of Bellingcat focused on contributing to scam compound eradication expose? And again, from all these questions, the people thank you for the great talk. So lots of questions, a little bit of overlap, perhaps.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, start again. So, how did the research? In terms of accessing the scam center workers, so a bit of background on colleague Ling. Her background is in anti-human trafficking work. Short version is she was, I think, doing a consultancy with Liverpool University on bride trafficking. She went to Cambodia to do the field work 5 years ago now, 4 years, 5 years. And she found out for the first time about the compounds, and had no idea about it. And then while she was there for her research, she connected with some of the rescue groups. There are several informal or semi-formal Chinese rescue groups, and she started to help them. She ended up staying in Cambodia, and then since then she started a PhD focusing on this topic. But she built a relationship with the rescue groups and has been working with them pretty much since then. So she is contacted by people who are inside looking for help, and she does her best to try and help people get out, and she talks with them after. So that's how most of our interactions have come about. Through our interactions with the survivors. Tracing links between sensors and backers. It's tricky. Corporate databases are useful, but also, I don't want to give too many of the trade secrets away. But there's ways, using open source materials, you can connect dots. It's difficult, but if you can match an address here with a phone number there and a Facebook account there, you can start to fill out a picture. Talk about that offline maybe. I don't. I'm not a theory guy. You need to talk to Ivan about failures of capitalist development. But I would say, one thing on the special economic zones, I think it is an interesting thing, but I feel the focus on special economic zones has been overplayed. There's actually very, very few of the compounds that are actually in special economic zones. I know 2 in Cambodia. So that's 2 compounds I know out of 250 are in special economic zone. The Golden Triangle Special Economic Zone, obviously a very big one. And then there's none in Myanmar that are actually in a zone that was legally designated a special economic zone. Some of them have called themselves that because it sounds nice, but they're not. So I think that's been a bit of a distraction. But to the broader point, so many, the workforce is young. I think people are struggling to find jobs. We know that a lot of those people that do go in willingly, they're effectively groomed. So some people have been approached by people while they're playing online games, and it's people that are in, Myanmar and Cambodia, and they tell them how much money they're making. They show them pictures of their lifestyle, and then there's young people who have no job prospects in, say, Indonesia or in Vietnam or wherever, and they're kind of getting, drawn in. So I think for sure the lack of economic opportunities in their home countries, for whatever reason, is making people more vulnerable. Either hopelessness, desperation, people are getting sucked in because of that. So I hope that answers that question somewhat. Connections between the compounds, for sure. We know the business group that was in the news yesterday is connected to multiple sites. There are certain officials in Cambodia that we know are connected to multiple casinos, which are linked to properties that are housing online sites. So it is possible to trace connections. I'm sure there are more that are connected that we don't know about, but for sure we can do that. Do I think numbers will go down as use of AI increases? I think it's still an open question. We've talked to people, and they are saying that AI is being used, but it can only go so far. So if you're having a conversation with someone and you're a guy pretending to be a woman to, you know, trick someone who's, you know, in Europe somewhere. You can have a video call, but you can only have it for so long. I've heard there's different tricks like putting a filter on and saying my connection is weak, so it's glitchy and, you know, like the picture's not very clear. And so then if there are flickers and stuff like that, it might be interpreted as, you know, weak internet. But I think all of those AI swap things, they're getting better and better, but they're not perfect. And I think like you couldn't sustain like an hour-long conversation. So I've heard of them having like saying I can only talk for a really short time and having like quick conversations with a fuzzy filter on it. So it's still not up to the point where anyone can do this from anywhere. I think it probably will lead to a decrease in the size of the labor force, but I don't know how long that's going to take, and I don't know how significant. Last one. We share a lot of information with different groups. We share information with journalists, with some law enforcement, embassies, there's different monitoring groups that are tracking the spread of the industry. So yeah, we don't sit on information if we can share it. So we're very active. I think the more is shared, the better. And people share things with us as well. So there's a bit of a community of people that are looking at this, that are comparing notes and trying to build up the picture. Yeah.
Well, many thanks, Mark, for a brilliant talk and for answering a range of different questions here. Please join me in thanking Mark the usual way. Interested, you get a chance to buy the book, which is I can attest is a really brilliant piece of work and very well footnoted and sourced and otherwise presented. I should mention moving forward, we'll have talks over the weeks ahead. Our next talk, same time next week, but in a different room, is by Dr. Bernard Keogh. Imagining Malaya, Rethinking Merdeka, Decolonization, Nation Making through the Perspective of the Peranakan Chinese, 1945-1957, another book. So please join us on that occasion or for other talks in the week ahead that are of interest to you. Thanks again.